Welcome to Sundance 2025, everyone. I'm Christian Blauvelt, the digital director of IndieWire. I'm so pleased to be talking to director David Osit, the force behind the new documentary Predators, which looks at the phenomenon of NBC's To Catch a Predator franchise, which aired from 2004 to 2007, made Chris Hansen a true crime star, and has spawned a whole universe of copycats that are still with us. Chris Hansen himself even driving a number of those. David, you talk a bit about how you were in college when the show was first airing,
right.
and you were really fascinated by it. It's one of these things like, turning it then into a movie. At what point did you know that this had to become a documentary?
I mean, it's a great question. I didn't think it could be much of an interesting documentary when I saw the show, but I saw it as a young adult before I got interested in filmmaking. And eventually I learned more details about how the show ended and some crazy stories that I didn't know the details of. But I never thought that a film about this TV show could be more than just a sort of typical salacious true crime story, which didn't necessarily compel me as a filmmaker. But then one day on a sort of random internet journey, as we all tend to go on, I found the online fandom community for To Catch a Predator, which is small but very passionate. And they've spent the better part of 2 decades collecting raw footage from the show, some of which never aired, but all of which never aired in its entirety. And these are things collected through the Freedom of Information Act and depositions, raw interrogation tapes, and just things from behind the scenes. And watching that raw material for the first time was the real hook for me. It was such an emotionally different texture than what the show was, because the show is edited as a sort of dark comedy. It's like you watch it and you feel schadenfreude for the guys that are caught in this show. It's also a bit dated. It's now almost 20 years old when it first aired. And watching this raw footage, I'd feel really bad for these guys because you're given space to actually contemplate them as human beings. But then I would watch, I would look at a chat log and then feel disgusted at them again. And then I'd come back and I would then hear a phone call between them and a decoy and feel grossed out again. And so I kept having this emotional ping pong in my head and in my heart. And I thought, what if I could make that the sort of spine of a film and give that experience to an audience?
I think that emotional ping pong is what so many people are going to feel watching your film, because yes, this is disgusting behavior that these men are exhibiting. It's monstrous behavior that could result in victims dealing with trauma for the rest of their lives. But what made them this way? You see that raw footage, they are human beings. Mm-hmm. This is the moment, you're watching the moment when their lives essentially end. Yes. I almost, in watching your film, was thinking this is almost like the 21st century equivalent of like public executions in a way, because you are essentially watching lives end. Maybe not literally, but figuratively.
It's the gallows, certainly. It's like the stockades. It's kind of the same thing as the stockades. We delight in our society, not just here in America, but we delight in the pain of other people. Like Susan Sontag wrote an amazing book about that. I think that what's interesting to me and what I sort of learned and internalized while I was making the film is that what's actually more complex is that all of us carry sort of a dual reservoir of empathy and cruelty. Like we're capable of both of those things, all of us are. And a show like this can actually, in a funny way, tap into both of those and use that as the formula for a television show.
And then there's the other side of it, which is that there is a level of exploitation in the TV show, of actual victims' trauma and pain. Like we're putting this on for ratings, for spectacle, to monetize this as a TV show. Mm-hmm. And you see that when you see Chris Hansen and others like going to CrimeCon and really having turned this into a brand and selling their merchandise and all. That kind of exploitative side of it in terms of the media. What were you thinking about that, and how did you go about conveying that?
It's funny that you use this word exploitative, and for me, those were always the red flag words that I had to look at and back away from in my filmmaking. I had to always basically, I went into this trying to do the opposite of what I felt shows like this had already done, which is to flatten the world into good and evil, right and wrong, bad and good. And I wanted to give everybody at least a chance to say, why are you here? Like, why do you do what you do? Why are you passionate about this work? And the answers surprised me, and I hope they surprise people when they watch the film. But it was always about trying to understand that people come to this sort of work from different places. And I think I've never met anybody who believes that they themselves are evil or they themselves are wrong. People try to calcify their own sense of right and wrong, and they believe in what they are doing to be good generally. Even people that we disagree with, even people who are elected to office, they themselves, even if we disagree with them, they believe in themselves and what they're doing. And I felt like, well, what if I could dig a little bit deeper and give an audience the chance to not already be having their minds made up for them, because that's what shows like this actually are doing. And that's what a lot of true crime entertainment does too. It kind of flattens the world and says, you're the good guys for watching this program, and the bad guys are the people that are in this program. And then the movie or the show ends and you turn it off and you congratulate yourself on not being a bad guy, and that's the end of the story. And I wanted to take a little deeper than that if I could.
Yeah. I have to say, I was wondering, for the first part of the film, would you have actually interviewed Chris Hansen for this? Would he have agreed to an interview? The fact that he does is so interesting. I mean, was it difficult getting him on board this project?
No, everyone asks me that. No, of course not. I mean, he wants to be on television. He's had a career doing television, and he loves being on TV. I mean, he started as a news anchor. He reported on 9/11. He reported on Oklahoma City bombings. His job, he cut his teeth doing the news, and in many ways, as far as he's concerned, he still is reporting on a problem that won't go away. And we talked about that. And I told him why I was interested in filming with him, and that I felt that he was in many ways the godfather of this genre. This genre meaning not the true crime genre, but the genre where law enforcement and journalism can kind of work together and create something that's a little bit entertainment laced. And that's what I would say is very prevalent today. And I do think it started with shows like To Catch a Predator.
After you had interviewed him and spent the time with him, I mean, there's an extraordinary sense of certainty that comes from him about the rightness of what he's doing. Did any of your perspective on what you felt about any of this change at all?
I would say if anything changed, it was actually how I felt about what I do for a living and what my colleagues in documentary and nonfiction film do for a living. Not in that I started to question myself that much, but it was this that I started to think, okay, well, there are people who do these online stings, because obviously the one thing the film goes into is that this has spawned, as you mentioned earlier, a whole cottage industry of online quote unquote vigilantes doing these things on TikTok and on other forms of social media, all on their own, without any police oversight, without any television broadcast, but they get just as many views as the original show ever got. So there's people doing this on their own, and we film with some of them, and they're doing it because they believe in what they're doing. And then there are people who are probably just doing it because they can get clicks, they can get ad revenue, they can get likes. And then there's people in the middle who believe that what they're doing is right, and they're also making a career out of doing it. Is that different than being a documentary filmmaker? Is that different than being a journalist?
And I think, the fact that your film interrogates those questions with such lucidity is what makes it such a riveting watch and haunting too. It's a film that I've been thinking about for days afterwards. So thank you so much for talking to me today and for bringing this film to Sundance. And I know people will experience a lot of emotions watching this.
I think so too. Thank you so much for having me.